Hello, my play of the day for round 11 from Wijk aan Zee is the game between Hikaru Nakamura and Levon Aronian. Up to this point, I think generally both players had a pretty solid tournament, pretty strong tournament, and both found themselves in joint second place going into this game. So quite an important encounter, and as ever, both players very enterprising and like to go for the win. So the signs were good. Okay, so Nakamura has the white pieces. He opened with d4, and it was a Slav opening. And in fact, the opening line was exactly the same as a game from the World Championship match between Gelfand and Anand. So this move was played by Aronian, the so-called Chebanenko variation. It's very, very popular at the moment. So one idea is to gain space on the queen side with b5. It's also partly a waiting move as well. You see how white's going to commit himself. And c5 from Nakamura. Okay, this was the line, was quite one of the most popular lines, but it played in the World Championship match between Gelfand and Anand. And that game now continued queen c2. That was actually the one game that Gelfand defeated Anand. But today Nakamura played knight a4, which looks very logical to try and control the b6 square. Of course, if you can control that, then later on that could be a very useful entry point for white's pieces. In fact, this is a very old continuation. This was played in a famous game from Nottingham 1936 between Michal Botvinnik and the English player Sir George Thomas. That game continued like this. It was a very long game, very famous game with a difficult endgame that Botvinnik finally won. But Aronian played something different. He played b5, breaking out straight away. He didn't think very long over this, and it seemed to me that he'd prepared this opening very well indeed. He knew exactly what he was doing. So he's breaking out. Now the only problem with this is that you could be left with rather a weak pawn on c6, but Aronian plays this very cleverly and very precisely and manages to break out. So rook b8 is an excellent move. Now white's problem is that if he plays b3, then black develops the bishop with tempo, and you can see there's absolutely no pressure on c5 or c6, and if black can actually exchange off knight for this bishop and get in c5, well, black's control over the dark squares and over the c file, remember that bishop covers c1, means that black is, well, I would say already stands slightly better. So Nakamura played bishop d3, giving up the b pawn. But, well, if black is too greedy here, then that can rebound. Aronian developed a bishop. Now knight e5, a second pawn sacrifice. Well, let's have a quick look and see what happens if black takes. I mean, I think there are a couple of ways to gain decent compensation. Problem is, once you give up that dark squared bishop, then all these squares are really, really weak. And for example, here you can already see that this bishop is threatening something unpleasant on the dark squares, and well, in this kind of position, again with black's bishop sitting here, I actually think black's best would be to return the exchange, but that's not very pleasant. So white would be doing very well. So Aronian, of course, isn't prepared to give up the initiative like that. And this is the point. He gets in c5. This is such an important move. That really, well, it improves black's pawn structure actually. Obviously this can't be taken because the knight is on prise. Black has a central pawn majority. This is the most important feature in the position actually, this central pawn majority, and that enables black to control the play, as we're about to see. So knight exchanged off for bishop, and now Nakamura gets his pawn back. Well, that's one thing. But now c4. Well, you can see how powerful this pawn chain is. it closes out white's rooks, and also that bishop, well, for the moment is completely stranded outside this pawn chain, the other side of the pawn chain. So white is forced to play a4 to give that bishop a square. But yeah, basically black has a better pawn structure here and stands better. I mean, this pawn is isolated at the moment. Well, when the bishop comes here, it's not going to be easy to win that, but still it's a kind of lack of flexibility in white's position. Okay, let's see how Aronian managed to exploit his strategic advantage. Bishop b4. Well, if the bishops are exchanged, then that makes life much easier for black. I think Nakamura's only chance is to retain the bishop pair, so that's a good idea. Now, an interesting idea would be to play f5 to try to lock down white's central pawns completely, so preventing this e4 break, and then maybe bring the knight here. That's one possibility. But okay, Aronian played much simpler actually, knight f6. And now here's an interesting moment. Again, I think normally you would want to keep your king in the middle of the board and then play develops. But Aronian castled here, which at first glance I found a strange move actually. But I think he sensed that there were tactical possibilities in the middle of the board, and when the position explodes, you want your king at the side of the board. His intuition didn't fail him. Let's see what happened. Okay, e4. So this is Nakamura's best chance. He needs to try to open up the position to get some play for his rooks and potentially bishops as well. Okay, so the bishop locks itself in here. Black would like to try and break that down. So that's an important move, bishop f4, to get this bishop going and controls an important diagonal. Rook b1. Okay, the bishop comes back. King f1. Yeah, it's round about here. Well, over the next few moves, white has the possibility to exchange down into an opposite colour bishop's ending. So, for example, he could take here, take on d6, and, well, how do we assess this position? Well, this bishop is now more secure. Clearly that can't be exchanged off. The opposite colour bishops mean that if the position simplifies again, if the rooks come off, then should be a draw. Why didn't Nakamura do this? Well, I think he realised he was still worse here, because that pawn is weak. That can be attacked by the bishop. If that drops, then there are two connected passed pawns, very nasty indeed. So white would be passive here, having to defend that pawn, and then black can try to play on the king side. I mean, obviously, doubling rooks is one idea, advancing the king side pawns as well, just crawling up the board, and if we can get a rook eventually on this rank to attack the pawn, then white could be in trouble. Can white hold a draw? Who knows? But this is an option for Nakamura, and well, at some point he probably should have simplified into this. Instead, I think understandably he wanted to keep the tension. It's not his style to try to defend a slightly worse position. But he underestimated black's tactical possibilities. Now here, black would probably like to play rook b7, that's one idea, and followed by perhaps exchanging, and that would probably force this. And maybe after h4, that's what Nakamura expected. He probably expected that something like this would happen, and then he's going to exchange off. But after h4, Aronian lunged with c3. Now obviously this is a very committal move indeed, because you're freeing the bishop. The bishop can come back if necessary, and this pawn now doesn't have the protection of this d pawn, but it does have the protection of the bishop. But the point behind c3 is there's now a tactical possibility. Knight takes b5 is interesting, but it seems as though white can probably defend this position because the bishop will come back to f4. But instead, e5 was played by Aronian. Now clearly Nakamura had overlooked this possibility. After pawn takes, knight takes. Now the point is, by playing e5, black has closed off this diagonal. And now black has two connected passed pawns, and this is a completely winning position. So for example, if e takes f6, okay, opening this up, but black has time to play rook takes b5, and it's all over. Okay, rook d1 played, rook takes b5, and if e takes, then rook b1 is completely winning c2. So rook c2, and now here Aronian calculated and thought he saw a forced win, and he played d3 here. But the simplest move is just to take on e5, and with these beautiful pawns protecting each other, black is even a pawn up here. I mean, it's completely winning. You play your rook to b1, you can transfer your bishop round to this side of the board, and maybe even playing like this, king to h7 and bishop round to h6. You can double on the first rank. I mean, white's blockade here is going to crack. I've put a lot of paint on the board there, but hopefully you get the idea. Completely winning for black. But instead, Aronian went straight for victory with d3. In fact, around here, Nakamura missed a chance with king f2. I think he'd probably forgotten, probably both players forgot that there's this move rook e2. And, well, you can reach that a similar position to the one we've just looked at, but without a pawn on d4. Now, I think black still has pretty reasonable winning chances here, but nothing like the game. Okay, in the game, now black is winning, and this is what Aronian calculated. And here white has to give up the exchange. Which also looks, doesn't look quite so clear as one would like, but actually rook d2 is a very, very good move indeed. Threatening rook d1, winning a bishop. And if king e1, then we can just take on g2. And, well, there are going to be very, very nasty threats indeed. Mate is threatened soon, and yeah, the king is in just a dreadful position. Let me see, let's go back. Rook c8 check was played. And now here, let me see. Yeah, I mean white can still play king e1, but it must be lost. So Nakamura decided to give up the bishop, hoping for some kind of fortress. So he's grabbed, he now has 3 pawns, but he's a rook down. But Aronian's technique was very good. He played rook d7, very efficient, I should say. If the rooks are exchanged, then black is going to win this ending very easily with his extra rook. You'll slowly force the king back, and with Zugzwang. Nakamura played rook h6, which actually loses quite quickly. Best try is to play rook h8, but well, let me show you a sample variation. Rook d2. Okay, this shows how we can force a Zugzwang position. Okay, so white for the moment is tied to defending this pawn, and now we can somehow get white into Zugzwang. So white is already running short of moves. This pawn can't advance. King f4 here, and now that's Zugzwang. The rook has no move, the pawn has no move, the king can't move here because of rook takes. That's typical. Or let me give you another example. What about f4? Then here, threatening the e-pawn, threatening the e-pawn again, check, and now we're in again and we win this pawn. So that's rather typical. Okay, in the game, Nakamura played rook h6, but now black can actually force an exchange of rooks, or you win another pawn. So after the rook exchange, it's very easy. Nakamura gave up one of the pawns, and here he resigned. 2 pawns is too little. That's going to be very easy for black to win. So a pretty convincing victory by Aronian, and that brings him into 2nd place in the tournament, a point behind Carlsen, who only managed to draw. Thanks for watching.